Hello, guys and gals. Me, Muda Hearts, one of those late night shower thoughts. And, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that I absolutely want to do is kind of talk about a little bit of video game stuff. I want to admit that I was actually wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you're hearing the actual audio here, yes, I do actually want to talk about, just video games. And I feel like nothing is going to be better if I talk about video games while also doing a little bit of a video game commentary in the middle of it as well, too. Kind of showing you exactly what I'm talking about, okay? Now, I've had late night shower thoughts when I've been wanting to talk about video games. And one of the things is, obviously, I read the comments and I see, Muda, you've been a little bit too negative about, every game. Do you even like playing video games? And the answer to that is yes, I actually really love playing video games. I play hundreds of hours worth of video games every year. I finish several video games. I actually tap into several franchises of video games that I normally would never get into. A lot of people love listening to music. A lot of people love watching movies. I love experiencing brand new video games. I love playing video games for their story. I love playing it for the gameplay. I love playing it to get crazy experiences where I'm standing at the very edge, looking down at actual traffic and getting fucking vertigo. Now, this game, ladies and gentlemen, is Mirror's Edge Catalyst. You might be wondering, when did this game come out? It came out 9 years ago, and I swear to God, it still looks so goddamn good, it's not even funny. Now, the thing about this video game is it's a AAA actual video game, meaning millions of dollars were spent on this. It's a open world experience by Electronic Arts. And granted, the open world in this game is not mega huge. To be honest with you, it's the perfect size. I'd rather have an open world where I go from here all the way to maybe, here with, different pathways. Not all the way to the edge of the fucking universe, okay? That doesn't really help or add any benefit to me. This game's got style. It's got something that I believe is called risk. And risk is when a massive video game company like EA decides to spend millions of dollars allowing you to play a video game that is outside the standard norm. Now, the thing about Mirror's Edge Catalyst is this is not just a game that came out on its own. This was actually a sequel to a 2008 video game called Mirror's Edge, or 2007, back in the days of the Xbox 360. And, that was an era where a lot of drab brown shooters came out. And a lot of those shooters were just standard military slop that would be tossed, in everyone's way. And DICE, the guys who made, Battlefield, decided, we're going to make a game like Mirror's Edge, an experimental game where the whole thing is about free running and parkour. And, it's not about just combat. It's about, basically first-person immersive platforming. And I would say that a game like this would probably never be made again. Because this cost EA millions of dollars. They made decent sales, enough for it to be meeting expectations, but not enough for them to be, I guess, considering further investing into this franchise. Now, for me, I'm not necessarily somebody that, doesn't understand the rule of business, right? Obviously, a lot of these big AAA companies, and I feel like a lot of my negativity comes from talking about them, is that I feel like for most AAA companies now, it really is just, let's release what is going to be the next big live service, the next big $1 billion a year video game, right? So I talked about Marathon, I also talked about Assassin's Creed, I talked about a lot of games. But I think the crux of where my anger kind of comes from and where my negativity comes from is this was a AAA game that came out back in 2017, and it was a brilliant video game. It's a game that I actually enjoyed. It was reviewed pretty equally, and that was pretty much it. It wasn't, a game that hit 90 on Metacritic or it hit 50, right? It was just in the middle of it. It was in between. And it was a game that, if you bought Mirror's Edge and you could enjoy it for the year, a lot of games around the days of the Xbox 360, I would say early PlayStation 4, early Xbox One, kind of did take serious risks, right? They allowed you to actually have different experiences instead of the same live service wannabe video game. Now, yesterday I made a video on a game called Marathon, and I was pretty negative on it. I was negative because what I had seen was a video game that was Marathon in name only, and really it was just hitting the live service trend. That's all it really felt that the game was doing. It wasn't really going out of its way to create a video game that I think is going to, set the world on fire. It's another extraction shooter, and it wasn't really setting itself away. And I feel like a lot of what I saw there was something that I would see in games like Call of Duty, in games like modern Halo, where a lot of companies will release a, let's be honest, unfinished product and expect gamers to stick around with it for years. A product that is going to be a paid-for product, a product that will obviously have microtransactions, cosmetics, battle passes, hyper monetization. We'll get to that in a bit later, instead of actually releasing a proper product. AAA gaming back in the days of the 360, I would say, when you got a game like Halo Reach, for instance, that game came with its campaign, it came with its multiplayer, it came with, PvP modes like Firefight, a map editor called Forge. It came with, custom games, so you could modify basically every aspect of the multiplayer suite and create entirely new modes that, you could play with new players all the time. And nowadays, it feels like a lot of the games that are coming out, like if you look at Halo right now, Halo Infinite came out a couple of years ago, and a lot of people ended up, enjoying when it dropped. It was a multiplayer experience, a live service online experience. But very quickly, I would say the hype for that game died because it wasn't a game that launched in a completed state. It launched in a state where the campaign was missing, the multiplayer was, in my opinion, good, but admittedly a little bare bones. It didn't have a PvP option. A lot of what I would play Halo for was missing. Holy shit, this game has some really bad vertigo. Jesus Christ. But yeah, literally that's what I believe the current state of AAA gaming, and one of my biggest issues with it comes out to. A lot of games that came out, even when Mirror's Edge Catalyst was releasing, were games that took advantage of the hardware at the time. They were still releasing, I would say, proper, AAA games with, $60 releases that were at least completed, or far more completed than games are now on launch. And realistically, that's where my negativity kind of comes from. And it's kind of wrong to take it out on the entirety of video games. I gotta hide from the actual cops here. It's a little wrong to take it out on the entirety of the video game industry because as many terrible AAA games come out and as many live service attempts come out where the goal is to monetize the game versus create a good title, a lot of these AAA games are honestly, for every bad AAA title, there's still at least like 5 or 6 amazing indie titles, and then double A titles, which, are titles that have a budget, but obviously not at the same level of something like fucking Mirror's Edge Catalyst, clearly. But monetization is where one of my big concerns is all the time. Obviously, video games have become more monetized since the, days of the Xbox 360. I would say back if you go into the days of the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, it's like you bought a game for $50, $60 at the time, and you got a fully completed title, right? And nowadays, when the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 launched, the ability for you to patch your game and be connected to PlayStation Network and all of these services basically led it so that, it was the birth of this release a broken game now, patch later mentality. And I feel like as those games also got introduced, there was another shift that was happening with gaming. A lot of mobile gamers were being kind of tapped into. So you had people who literally only played video games on their cell phone. And they were used to microtransactions and basically paying, $1 for the tiniest thing gameplay-wise. Now the reality is, when you translate that to big consoles in the PC industry, everyone's just going to be rightfully fucking pissed, right? Like, nobody wants to buy a game for $60 and then, log in and see a storefront where immediately the cosmetics on a screen are $15 to $20, right? We used to, back in the day, shit on companies like Bethesda that released Horse Armor, right? And I think Horse Armor back in the day probably cost $5 or $10. I think it was like 400 or 800 Microsoft points, one or the other. And we rightfully shat on a company like Bethesda for releasing, again, a fucking cosmetic and a premium video game, a $60 or $50 video game at the time. Nowadays, it's pretty common that basically every single AAA, shooter or live service game will have microtransactions. And, it's not always, oh my God, there's actually cops there. It's not always at the same egregious factor of something like I would say even Madden or a lot of sports games, right? Where I think sports games are probably the worst in terms of monetization. Like every time I look at an NBA game, it's literally difficult for me to identify if what I'm looking at is a fucking casino or an actual video game, right? Like, is it a basketball game or is it a fucking casino? But when it comes to shooters, right? Like whether you go to like, Marathon or Halo or Rainbow Six, it always feels like there's a $20 skin attached in what appears to be, times even a paid for experience, right? Like I could understand something like Fortnite, for instance, right? Where Fortnite is a, free game. It's not something you pay for, and you're going with the expectation that the game, because it's free, right? Like you're supposed to kind of, the microtransactions feel like tipping, right? It's like, I get this game that I can put hundreds of hours into for free. Let me give you like $20 here and there for a skin. And then, you got games like Rainbow Six where you got to pay like, $40 or $60. And then on top of that, you're being thrown like 6 different types of cosmetics, right? It feels like for a lot of these game companies, it's almost like producing the game comes second versus, trying to hyper monetize it and basically turn almost every big AAA release into a storefront. You got games like Assassin's Creed where the single player experience, right? A single player game, which if you played the recent Assassin's Creed title, right? Like Shadows, the reason why I haven't really stuck through finishing it is because I feel that the game was hyper repetitive. Every single quest, side quest, or main quest felt as if I was just going to 7 generic NPCs in the world and sticking a knife in their throat, right? So the gameplay felt incredibly repetitive to the point that I really didn't feel like completing it. And even in a game like that, it felt like, oh my god, it felt hyper monetized. There's battle passes in the game, which granted are not as egregious as, other battle passes. I believe in Assassin's Creed, you don't have to pay for them. They're just there for you to complete, which is far better than a lot of other battle pass solutions I've seen. But you've also got scenarios where in the game, you've got entire cosmetic storefronts, right? Like you've got FOMO cosmetics. You got to play the game, unlock the battle pass cosmetics or get the the battle pass currency and then get the, skins on top of that. It's almost as if making a modern AAA game, it's like the game part comes second, the innovation part comes second. A lot of these companies will spend millions of dollars on games like that. And, they'll be lambasted by critics, right? Because people will call them out for shitty business practices. But then you'll have games like Mirror's Edge Catalyst where, you can spend millions of dollars. And granted, you're not making this a live service, so EA's not generating $1 billion off this every year. In fact, they actually shut down the servers for this game just because I assume it was probably more costly for them to keep it up for a game that maybe didn't have that crazy active of a player base. But it shows you where the priorities lie. I feel like for a lot of modern video games, it's almost as if, if a video game isn't making $1 billion a year, or if it's not another live service, it just doesn't get approved, right? I don't think that game companies in the AAA space don't want to make titles like Mirror's Edge. I think DICE probably wants to, but I also think publishers like EA, publishers like Ubisoft, publishers, oh my god, I'm falling to my death. Publishers like Sony, publishers like Microsoft don't want this to happen. For them, it's mostly focusing on what is safe, what is going to appeal to millions of players, and ultimately what's going to bring in that big, $1 billion a year revenue. And that's really where I think a lot of the modern games have really come out to. And I think a lot of the anger that I have when looking at the AAA space comes from looking at games release every single year, at least for the last 2 years, drop in a state like this, right? It feels like the only game that I'm looking to that's going to be truly unique is something like Grand Theft Auto 6. And if me getting excited for a AAA game means that I get excited for a franchise that releases, after 2 or 3 presidential fucking cycles, then that's not a healthy state for this aspect of gaming to be in. But that's really where my mind comes into. There's also a lot of games to really look forward to. I don't really talk a lot about positive, gaming experiences, and I think a lot of that just comes out with the fact that I am just jaded in that AAA space. But what really fucks with me a lot in this space too is like, in the AAA space, you'll have games like L.A. Noire, which Rockstar released fucking back in the 360 generation. I was doing my SATs when this game was out. And that game was a linear as fuck detective movie story game. Now, the thing about it is in the last year or two, there's been a game called Shadows of Doubt on Steam. Now, this game basically is a procedurally generated open world game where you have to basically solve a murder mystery. So it's got a live world where NPCs are constantly active, right? And you go to a murder scene. And this murder scene, you have to effectively identify if people in this murder, like you have to basically, like you get notified that somebody has died in this game. And you're basically finding that you're basically doing like actual like detective work. You're actually in this universe. You're doing like proper detective work on this dead body. You're gathering evidence. And in the meantime, as you're doing it, there's an actual serial killer in the world. So it's one of those games where every second that you spend without actually finding the serial killer means that every other NPC in this world is going to die. It's truly a living, breathing world. Now, the thing about this game is this is an indie game. You know, instead of a big AAA company going out of their way, putting their resources into it, a lot of indie developers will, on a comparative shoestring budget, produce a game like that. And it really feels like a lot of big AAA companies will, at one point, experiment with that. But now they don't. Now it's, again, just more safe releases. And that's really where a lot of my anger kind of comes out from, right? It's not that, you know, I'm jaded with gaming. It's just that as, you know, I've grown up and, you know, in the last 10 to, I want to say, 12 years in gaming, there's been a dramatic shift in video games that, you know, at least in the AAA space, are far more safe, far less innovative, and in some cases, far less complete on launch, you know? It's not the days where games like Gears of War, oh my god, who the fuck would design this empty hallway? It's not games like, you know, Gears of War 3 or games like Halo where, you know, or Halo 3 where, again, these were completed releases on launch. It's games like Halo Infinite or Marathon or really insert any AAA live service game. It doesn't even have to be a shooter where a lot of the content isn't even actually completed day one. Or you have to spend a year for the game to actually get patches and content for it to be worth the actual asking price that these companies, you know, ask you for, whether it be $50, $60, $70, or $80, right? So that's really where my frustration sort of come from, and I wanted to just really kind of make a video where I showed you a video game that I think is still one of AAA's best, which is Mirror's Edge Catalyst, and kind of talk about really where my anger comes out from. These were really just shower thoughts in my head that I wanted to get out, because I really do feel that it's important for me to relay this, because I don't want to jump into the current modern gaming discourse that we see now. Now, I'm going to briefly talk about it. There's a lot of culture war stuff that you probably see talked about with video games, whether it be wokeism in video games, whether it be, you know, the constant pushing of ideologies, which, you know, granted does happen to an extent. Like, we've all seen how fucking insane that Dragon Age, what is that, the new Dragon Age game was trying to do with some of its insane cutscenes. But I feel like a lot of the people that are currently discussing and talking about video games on the internet are kind of conflating my complaints with the industry's hyper-monetization, complete safety, and lack of actually creating real innovative games that they once really used to, with, again, constant talk about ideologies, which game is woke. You know, sometimes you'll see, like, you know, a fucking minority in a video game and it just makes, you know, a group of people freak out. There's a lot of stuff with video game discourse that's just so fucking tiring, and it just makes engaging with an actual healthy discussion about the state of the industry tough. Because it feels like you're sharing space with people that really don't play video games in the first place. And that's really where I just want to kind of keep this stuff. Again, it's not necessarily something I want to start some weird drama with this entire part of the internet for. I just wanted to get my words out there. But in general, my real beef with this industry is ultimately that I feel like a lot of bean counters, a lot of executives at the top are basically creating video games with, again, that intense express purpose to release product that is just meant to be consumed. Not product like this, like Mirror's Edge or, you know, games like this, where a lot of these companies are willing to take a risk with the premium side of gaming. And yeah, you can have things like skill trees, but ultimately, we're long past this industry experimenting with cool ideas like this, and instead giving us the same tired releases in the same franchises that honestly, we've been playing since we were kids, really. Like, it's kind of crazy, you know? I wouldn't be thinking that I would be playing Call of Duty releases in the big 2025, but I am. It's still one of the most popular games out there, and it's also one of the most creatively fucking bankrupt games that I've played out there, too. But I wanted to talk about this because I don't think gaming is dead. I just think that gaming is in a weird space where a lot of the big AAA stuff is, again, consumed by an overly safe, overly sanitized, overly corporate group of people that just want to create video games that literally serve to generate live service bucks. And I don't understand why the industry is so horny for it, considering the fact that I would say in most cases, this attempt constantly fails. I feel like if a lot of these companies were still releasing games like Mirror's Edge in amongst titles like Battlefield and Call of Duties, we wouldn't really have a lot of complaints to be making, right? Because you would have a lot of these, you know, safe shooters and safe video game releases like Assassin's Creed every year in amongst a lot of these innovative releases that they would push through. I mean, even a lot of the games that we consider live service stuff today, like Assassin's Creed, for instance, started off with a lot of these companies willing to take a pretty serious risk. Ubisoft was willing to take a serious risk and play with the powers of modern technology. And nowadays it feels like that franchise, which now itself has fucking 20 mainline entries at this point, feels as if it's nothing but a shadow of its former self. But yeah, I wanted to talk about it because I really did. This is really my thoughts on video games. And, you know, I am wrong to be overly negative because for every bad AAA release that comes out, there's also a lot of good indie stuff that nobody jumps into. And honestly, like, even if video gaming in the current year is completely fucking creatively bankrupt, there are so many games in my backlog from so many generations of consoles and PC eras that I don't think I'm ever going to absolutely run out of content to really play in this industry. But yeah, I know that I've been kind of running around randomly, but this game really, like, replaying this game brought that spark of, like, I think AAA still has it. I really do think so. Will they go back to games like this? Will they try their hands at unique concepts of games? Maybe, or maybe not. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and yeah, I'm out.